This is the best survivalist in the wild of her country, enduring 100 days in the Southeast Asian rainforest without carrying any modern gear. On her journey, she not only made safe, useful sanitary pads but also wove underwear from tree bark. Her craftsmanship was so impressive that even her neighbors would admire her skills. In the previous episode, Thuy Tien had survived for more than a month. She thought of quitting after eating the wrong wild berries, but on her way back, her stomach eased and she chose to continue the challenge. Recently, she survived by catching tilapia. Each time she checked the traps, she brought back small harvests, grilling them over a big fire. Thanks to added protein, her earlier food poisoning symptoms improved somewhat. By day 36, while exploring, she discovered a large number of acorns. For her, they were a perfect dessert. But their sourness made her teeth numb, so she took some back to camp. Since eating them raw was too harsh, she boiled them in a pot and added nectar. The natural sweetness balanced the sour taste, making the dish more pleasant, though not very appealing in looks. After half an hour of cooking, dinner was ready. Tasting it, she found it surprisingly refreshing, like millet porridge. After lunch, she planned to improve her shelter. She cleared the ground, dismantled the old stove, and used baskets to carry mud from the riverbank. She spread and packed it down firmly, making the hut much brighter and cleaner. Another day quickly passed. At dawn, she went to the river to check her fish trap. With the water level rising, she caught 5 medium tilapia. With food secured, she continued weaving the unfinished set of underwear, still using thin bamboo strips, burning off the fibers with fire, piece by piece. The survival bikini was finally complete. Putting it on felt like returning to human society. She also wove a mat for the hut, placing it on the bed for more comfort. To make climbing in and out easier, she built a small ladder beside the shelter. Her jungle home was slowly becoming more complete. By day 39, lunch was still just tiny finger-sized fish, one of the few protein sources she had. While exploring around camp, she found an injured bird that had fallen from a tree. She brought it back, placed it near the fire to dry its feathers. If it survived the night, she planned to keep it as a pet to ease her loneliness. If not, it would at least provide protein. On day 40, in the morning, she caught a grasshopper to feed the bird, and to her surprise, it ate eagerly. Still, she had little time to play with it. For cleaning her sticky hair, once a week she used plant ash to wash. The method worked but caused strong scalp irritation. When she tried drying her hair by the fire, strands came out in clumps, leaving her terrified. If she lost her hair, it wouldn't be worth it. She guessed the cause was a lack of salt. Her body was already so thin and fragile, she feared collapse at any time. Preparing for her next period, she decided to make sanitary pads from natural materials. She collected plant fibers, absorbent bark, cotton gathered earlier, and palm bark for wrapping. She boiled everything for sterilization, dried it, then layered the materials, sprinkling more ash for absorption, and wrapped them in palm bark. Finally, she tested it by soaking in warm water. Though crude, it still worked, though she worried it might be uncomfortable. Another night passed quickly, and at dawn she returned to the river to check her fish traps, only to be surprised. This time, the harvest was incredibly abundant. She caught a huge batch of fresh fish. Back at camp, she ate a little bland wild greens, then enjoyed a few bites of crispy grilled fish. However, without salt, everything still tasted flat. More importantly, her health was declining, and if this continued, it could be dangerous. To supplement salt, she thought of using her own waste. She went to the makeshift toilet, planning to collect urine and feces to refine nitrate salt. But since she rarely went, small animals had already eaten everything. With no choice, she had to find another solution. On day 42, she decided to make substitute salt from plant ash. She stirred the ash with water in a pot, filtered it through palm fiber, then heated it until the water evaporated. After many hours, she finally obtained a little white powder. It tasted somewhat like salt, but too much could cause high potassium levels. To be safe, she tested a small amount. At lunch, she cooked wild vegetable soup and added the newly refined salt. The flavor improved, but she wasn't sure if it would help her health. By day 43, her body began swelling from long-term salt deficiency. To deal with it, she went into the forest to find medicinal herbs. The area had many, but without knowledge, identification was hard. After gathering some plants, she boiled them into tea. She also saved a bit of red ginseng for later. The brew smelled like traditional medicine from a shop. She only hoped it would work. Another night passed. The next day, she caught only 3 small fish. They were gone in a few bites. After eating, she wished her body would recover, but instead, her condition worsened. Not only was her thinking slower, but even simple tasks became difficult. By day 45, her symptoms still hadn't eased. She realized this was clearly the result of severe salt deficiency. On top of that, being alone so long, she began experiencing hallucinations. Exhausted, she wondered if she should continue this challenge. After persevering until now, quitting felt like a waste. But in the end, she decided to send a distress signal. Without professional medical support, she could only rely on nearby villagers to bring her salt. With salt, her symptoms would surely improve. However, reaching the village meant crossing a high mountain and walking over 5 kilometers through dense forest. Getting lost was a real risk. To prepare, she used her drone to map the route. After checking the path, she rested for the night, planning to set out in the morning. On day 46, she woke early, put on her grass sandals, grabbed the satellite phone and power bank, and began the long journey. Along the way, she gathered useful materials. A trip that should have taken 3 hours ended up lasting more than 5. By the time she arrived, it was already afternoon. She successfully collected salt stored under a tree, but before she could celebrate, she had to hurry back before dark. On the way, she stepped on something unusual. Looking closer, she dug it out with her hands, and to her shock, it was an automatic rifle. The discovery terrified her, because where there are guns, there was once a battlefield. If there were landmines beneath her feet, her life would end instantly. Observing carefully, she saw the gun was badly rusted and unusable. She guessed it was a relic of an old war. Still, some of its parts might be useful, perhaps to craft a hunting knife later. After more than 3 hours of walking, she finally returned to camp just before nightfall. For breakfast, she had a few wood ear mushrooms. This time, cooking with salt, the flavor instantly improved. Right now, she only hoped to recover her health quickly. Afterward, she removed a small part from the gun, planning to turn the metal into a small knife. She began sharpening it against stone, then heated it over glowing coals. To prevent cracking during tempering, she carefully added a bit of clay into water. When the metal was red hot, she plunged it into the muddy mixture to harden it. Next came non-stop grinding until the blade was sharp. From this point, she officially entered the Iron Age. Time passed. By day 49, her efforts paid off. She caught 4 or 5 plump tilapia. Even the innards weren't wasted, they could serve as bait for traps. Back at camp, she cooked the fish. Thanks to salt, the flavor was much better, and with extra protein, she had strength to continue. She then started crafting a hunting knife. First, she dug up clay to make a mold. Then she carved a piece of wood into the shape of a blade and placed it inside. She sealed it with another layer of clay, preparing to melt the gunmetal for casting. The next step was a real challenge. She needed a furnace to burn charcoal. Since gathering firewood took too much time, she had to work efficiently. She decided to build a kiln on the mountainside. She dug a deep pit, then went to the river for water to mix with mud. The process drained her energy. Once the base was complete, she lit a small fire to dry it. By the next morning, she had a simple breakfast of roasted sweet potatoes. To boost flavor, she found spicy leaves and cooked them with grilled rat meat, creating a surprisingly tasty meal. With many tasks ahead, she entered the forest to gather dry wood for charcoal. She cut logs into proper lengths and arranged them in a cone shape on the ground, the simplest method of charcoal making. She used mud to cover the stacked wood with a thin layer, then lit a fire inside. As the temperature rose, the outer shell hardened. At the right moment, she sealed the top with earth to trap heat for a full day and night until the wood turned completely into charcoal. By day 52, now more familiar with forest life, she discovered a new food: roasted spiders. She knew people in Yunnan often ate them this way. She gathered 4 or 5, placed them in a bowl, and roasted them over fire until the shells were crispy. Tasting one, she was surprised by the rich flavor: crispy, juicy, and aromatic. Even more impressive, spiders had protein levels hundreds of times higher than beef. While waiting for the charcoal, she continued building the furnace. She stacked layer after layer of clay, using a hollow brick inside as a divider. She coated it with more mud until it reached the height she wanted. Once complete, she lit another fire to dry it fully. To support metal smelting, she planned to make a blower to boost the heat. Using branches, she built a cross-shaped frame, set it in place, then sealed it with mud. By nightfall, day 55 arrived. Whenever she caught many rats, she smoked the meat to preserve it longer. After 2 days and nights, the charcoal pit was finally ready. She immediately turned her focus back to finishing the furnace. After 3.5 hours of constant labor, the structure stood tall, with one side designed for the blower. She fixed 2 wooden rods to hold a wheel, covering it with leaves to act as fan blades. When tested, everything ran smoothly. To prevent air leaks, she sealed the top with mud. By day 57, the moment had come. She prepared to smelt the metal. She placed the salvaged gun parts inside. She placed the mold inside the furnace so that when the iron melted, it could flow in and take shape as a survival knife. The furnace burned hot all day with charcoal, flames roaring non-stop. She stayed focused, never daring to look away. By nightfall, she was completely exhausted, and the charcoal was gone. She wasn't sure if the forging had succeeded. The next morning, eager to check, she found the furnace cracked. Opening it, her heart sank. The metal pieces had not fully melted because the temperature was too low. The main problem was the lack of charcoal. 2 full days of hard work, yet the outcome was bitterly disappointing. Weakened and drained, her skin had even lost its elasticity. This failure was not only a technical setback but also a harsh test of her willpower. Frustrated, she thought about tearing the furnace apart. "I really wasted too much time on this. Something must be wrong with me. My head feels like it's been kicked by a mule," she scolded herself. The disappointment left her hopeless. That day, she did nothing, just lay in camp. By day 60, after a night of deep thought, her spirit slowly recovered. Since casting hadn't worked, she chose the most primitive method: flattening the gun barrel. She believed that by repeatedly heating and hammering, she could still forge a survival knife. Fired up again, she placed the barrel in hot coals until it glowed red. Then pulled it out and hammered it against stone. Lacking a proper hammer, she used the gun body as one, with a wooden stick as a handle. Step by step, strike after strike, the barrel was finally beaten flat into an iron plate. By the end of the morning, she was utterly drained. Her arms were badly burned from the heat, so she smeared clay over them to ease the pain. She refused to waste the few scraps of wood left and kept working until nightfall. By day 61, the survival knife finally took shape. It only needed sharpening. But her hands were swollen from the forging, and even her eyes began to puff up. If untreated, it could slow her progress. With no other choice, she went out to look for herbs. Thanks to her knowledge of plants, she quickly gathered a large pile of ma dinjan, known for reducing swelling. Nearly all of her tools had been handmade, and whenever hungry, she simply caught a few ants or crabs to roast and eat, living truly like a wild native. By day 65, breakfast was surprisingly good: a pot of fresh mushroom soup with roasted crabs, providing a bit of protein. But crab meat was scarce and couldn't keep her full. After so long in the wilderness, she had grown emotionally numb. Nothing she did brought joy anymore, and she worried about her mental state. One morning, she planned to explore but noticed blood stains on the ground. Judging by the drops, the animal was large. Following the trail, she saw signs of a fight, proof that big creatures lurked nearby. A chill ran down her spine. The jungle was unsafe. That night, the forest echoed with terrifying sounds, keeping her awake in fear. At dawn, she packed her things, determined to find a safer campsite. Skipping breakfast, she carried her gear toward the mountains. But by noon, heavy rain poured down, and walking barefoot too long left her feet cut and bleeding. To avoid worsening her injuries, she decided to return. She stayed at camp waiting for Kwang, then headed out again to find a new spot. Since it rained nonstop, she decided to finally work on making soap. The process wasn't too hard. She mixed tree ash with water, stirred it well, then used palm bark to filter out impurities. The key ingredient was pig fat. She cut the fat, melted it in a pot, and as it cooked, the aroma tempted her so much that she leaned over and inhaled deeply. If only this were edible, it would be amazing, she thought. Next, she stirred the ash mixture into the fat until it thickened, then added herbal juice for fragrance. Finally, she poured the soap into leaves to cool. After a few days, the surface would turn smooth, ready for use. By day 66, she prepared pigskin she had picked up, cleaning off the greasy fat carefully so it could be used later for crafting. Her new task was weaving clothes. She long dreamed of making a wool-like top from rope fibers. First, she wove the sleeves, then connected them to the torso. The job demanded patience, but after 2.5 days, the sweater's shape was complete. To her surprise, it fit perfectly, comfortable for movement. With this sturdy garment, she no longer worried about branches scratching her. Lunch that day was simple. She cooked a little smelly brown fish and added 2 small catfish she had saved, just enough to restore some energy. By day 68, she realized, what good was clothing without shoes? She decided to use an old piece of rotting boar hide to craft leather footwear. Unfortunately, the hide was limited, so she focused on making durable thick soles. First, she measured by placing her bare feet on the skin. She cut the hide to size, punched holes, threaded rope, and tied it firmly. For the missing parts, she used cotton rope as reinforcement. After more than 3 hours of non-stop work, a simple but useful pair of pigskin sandals was done. She quickly slipped them on. Comfort didn't matter, as long as her feet were protected. When night fell, all her gear was finally ready. She planned to move camp early the next morning. But before officially relocating on day 69, she wanted one last good meal. At dawn, she brought out all the dried ants she had stored, caught a few grasshoppers to improve the flavor, cracked a mouse egg she had saved, and boiled several tiny crabs until they were crisp. The result was a feast, colorful, fragrant, and filling. Likely the most complete, protein-rich meal she had enjoyed so far. Wearing her handmade pigskin sandals and carrying her gear, she set off toward the mountain peak. Another reason for moving was that local resources had been exhausted. Staying longer offered nothing. She began climbing along a dry riverbed, but soon heavy rain poured down, even though the morning had been sunny. Forced to shelter beneath a large tree, she lit a small fire that night and curled up under its roots until morning. By day 70, after searching, she finally found a good location for a new shelter, a flat spot with sunlight, surrounded by trees for framing, and a stream nearby for water. Since construction would take more than a day or two, she found a cliff to hide under whenever it rained. Soon after, a bloodstain on the ground caught her attention. Judging from the size, it seemed that small animals in the area. Because the tracks were large, she decided to set a trap there. She found 2 branches, placed them on the ground like clamps, and quickly built a trigger so that when a small animal passed through, it would be caught. But after finishing, she hesitated. Maybe it was because she had just left her old camp and wasn't used to the new place. She sat thinking for a long time, even doubting if moving had been the right choice. After a short rest, she made a precaution against larger animals. Using bamboo, she crafted a simple noise-making device, by cutting the bamboo flat on both sides, splitting it down the middle, then striking the halves together, producing sounds that scared animals away. With tasks piling up, she had to quickly start building her shelter. She cleared the ground, cut 2 sturdy branches as the main frame, and raised it about 5 feet above ground to avoid wild animal attacks. That night, she still slept beneath the cliff. But by the next morning, she gathered materials for a simple bed. To make climbing easier, she tied a small ladder directly to the tree trunk. The bed surface was fastened with vines. That night, she could finally sleep on her handmade bed. By day 72, she focused on building a proper roof. The thatched roof at her old shelter hadn't been waterproof, so this time she gathered thick palm leaves to use as tiles. She tied a frame above the bed, sharpened several homemade nails with her survival knife, and pinned the leaves to wooden beams. The method worked well. After 2.5 hours, the roof was done. Her craftsmanship was impressive. The roof was packed so tightly it would be difficult for rain to leak through. After solving the shelter problem, her next worry was protein. She gathered materials and wove a fishing net, a skill she had practiced hundreds of times, so the work was finished quickly. By day 74, she noticed more animal traces nearby. Perhaps from being alone too long, she had become overly cautious. She set up alarm devices around the camp, mechanisms that would snap shut and make noise if any animal passed by, giving her warning from a distance. But even that wasn't enough. She sharpened bamboo sticks, planted them in rings around the camp, and covered them with leaves to defend against larger predators. Her nerves grew strained, always worried about being stalked. Sometimes she even doubted herself, wondering if it was paranoia. Too much time alone had shaken her mental state. How much longer could she survive like this? As a true survivalist, her skills were remarkable. Living alone in the Southeast Asian jungle, she aimed for the 100-day challenge. Even while starving, with little food, only 5 fatty fish and some wild rats, she endured. Without human contact, she might have lasted 1.5 years. By day 75, the isolation had made her quiet and mentally fragile. To cook rice and boil water more efficiently with her clay pot, she dug 2 deep holes and connected them. One side was for cooking, the other for feeding firewood. When finished, she felt completely exhausted. Weeks without proper nutrition left her weak, dizzy, and faint. Deep down, she feared she couldn't hold on much longer. The next morning, while reinforcing the camp to make sure every corner was secure, she stumbled upon something unexpected. Down in the river, she discovered plenty of large fish, so she decided to build a giant fish trap. Gathering bamboo, she began weaving a massive fish cage. After 2 full days of work, by day 82, the giant trap was finally complete, so large that she could actually crawl inside it herself. She hauled it to the riverbank, weighed it down with a stone, and pushed it into the water, hoping for results the next morning. By day 84, at dawn, she checked the trap and surprisingly caught 4 small fish. They weren't big or valuable, but enough for a meal. After lunch, she returned to the river full of hope, convinced that such a huge trap must bring in bigger fish. But when she pulled it out, it was completely empty, cleaner than her own hands. Disappointed at the lack of protein, she went back to camp and made mosquito-repelling lamps. She wrapped medicinal leaves in bark, sealed the outside with twigs, and created several natural bug-repellent torches. Later, she went back to the river and caught a few crabs, which became her dinner. On day 85, she checked the fish trap again, but there was still nothing. She suspected the gaps were too wide, letting fish slip away. So, she reinforced it with extra bamboo strips before placing it back in the water. Besides fishing daily, she also set up bamboo tube traps around the camp. If a small animal passed through, the mechanism would clamp down. It was simple to make and effective enough to arrange a whole network of traps. But by day 86, when she went to inspect them, there were still no results. For breakfast, she had nothing but a few wild roots, but when she went to check the fish trap, she was stunned. It had caught several big fish. Pulling them out, she realized there were 5 giant ones, like national treasures. So much meat at once felt unreal. After calming down, tears welled in her eyes. All her hardships had finally paid off. By the stream, she cleaned the fish carefully, saving the innards to use later as bait for catching rats. Then, with branches, she built a quick smoking rack, arranging all the fish to cure over the fire. With these 5 giants, she now had enough food for at least a week. That night, she grilled one and devoured it, savoring every bite. After days of hunger, she finally felt satisfied. She even ate crunchy wild roots alongside. While the fish bones roasted in the fire turned out tasty too, she placed the innards into traps, and by day 87, the rat snares began to work. But she didn't eat them right away. Instead, she soaked the meat in water to rot, planning to use it as bait for catching catfish. In her spare time, she crafted a simple spring-loaded tool. Pleased with its strength, she then selected some straight branches, roasted them over fire, stripped the bark, and sharpened the tips. Tied with thin rope, they became arrows. Testing them outside, she found their force was impressive. By day 91, however, her hand injury from weaving the fish trap had worsened. Malnourished and still not healed, she felt despair. Yet when she checked her traps, she had an unexpected harvest, dozens of wild rats. Even then, she didn't cheer, only quietly carried them back, cleaned and skewered the meat on sticks, and set them over smoke. There was far too much rat meat for one meal. She couldn't eat all the meat, so she stored the rest in baskets. The following days felt like years, lonely and dull. She often lay in the hut, lost in thought, sometimes unable to hold back tears. Though she always considered herself strong, the long solitude wore her down. She wondered if staying here had any meaning at all. With intelligence and endurance, she had survived so many days, yet the emptiness of being alone overwhelmed her. Her back and legs were covered with marks, perhaps signs of illness, and she feared it wasn't minor. Suddenly, life and death struggles felt meaningless. She no longer wanted to fight. By day 94, she packed her belongings, unearthed the clothes she had buried months earlier, and realized her waist had shrunk several sizes. She left behind the handmade tools at the base of a tree. Life had been harsh, but she remained resilient. After saying farewell to the little shelter that had kept her alive, she finally returned to human society, though she hadn't achieved her original goal. The fact that she had survived in such an environment proved her strength to the audience. If something feels off, let us know in the comments so we can make every story even better. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss an episode.